Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Ishvara. Is that the right pronunciation?
Ishvara?
Ishvara. In Sanskrit, they always have this thing between V's and W's where somewhere in the middle. So actually, I'm his guest. I'm at his place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the way that happened is kind of interesting. I got an email from somebody in Portugal who, someone named Christina or Christiana or something like that. And she emailed me and said, "Oh, I really loved your interview with David Spiro, and would you also please interview Ishvara because he has been very influential in my life, and I'd love it if you could talk to him." I said, "Okay, I'll check it out." So I looked up his website, and it turned out he's in Albuquerque. And it also turned out that I was going to Albuquerque. And then I looked more closely on MapQuest and discovered that his place is walking distance from where I was going, my sister-in-law's house. And so I walked up here this morning. So I guess if this were car talk, I'd be saying that we're broadcasting from the small world department of Buddha at the Gas Pump this morning. Do things always work so nicely in your life? I mean, coincidentally, things just kind of mesh and work out?
Yeah, that seems to be the way it is. I mean, even going to Germany worked out that way. It was just kind of this synchronistic kind of thing happened. Somebody saw me in a magazine and they got interested and they came to our place when we were in Santa Fe, and that's how they met me, and wound up going to Germany several times, and so.
Good. Well, hopefully this will open you up to a whole new batch of people who haven't heard of you, and some of them.
Yeah, I'm kind of the best kept secret in the world, I think.
So let me give you a little sense of how I've been doing these shows and what my motivation is in doing them, and I think that'll springboard us into the conversation. So I myself have been meditating a long time, about 42 years, and so I'm naturally interested in this sort of thing. And I've also always enjoyed just talking to people, and almost in casual conversation I tend to interview people because I never run out of questions, and so one day I was in my garage working out on my Bowflex machine, and I thought, I'll do an interview show and interview people who've had a spiritual awakening. So I went through various stages of trying to figure out how best to set that up, and local radio station, local public access TV station, shifting over to Skype. But the thing has been evolving over the last year, and my motivation in doing it is, I suppose, manifold. Firstly, I just simply enjoy it, and I felt people would find it useful. And the fundamental theme is, ordinary people who have had a spiritual awakening. You don't have to be special or anything like that. And of course, in some sense, everybody's ordinary, and in another sense, everybody's special. And so I started out with just people in my hometown, which is a town in which several thousand people meditate, and there are plenty of people to interview. And then I began branching out. And there are several sort of benefits, I think, that people derive from this. Firstly, they see that awakening shows up in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily fit into a particular niche, in a rigid way. Yeah. And secondly, they may recognize something in their own experience that they didn't even realize they had because it's become so natural and second nature to them. But they hear somebody else say it and they think, yeah, I've got that. Wow, I must have already developed something that I thought I was still seeking, but I've already attained it, And a variety of other things like that. People react to it in different ways. And they listen to this as a podcast while driving to work, or maybe in sitting in front of the computer or whatnot. So in any case, that's just a nutshell view of how I got this started and why I'm doing it. So, with regard to your situation, I noticed on your website, I read your little biography, and I kind of liked the way you started out with pictures of your childhood. You kind of moved through your life in different stages, and perhaps we might do that with the interview itself. If you could give us a sense of the road you've taken and what significant milestones there were on it. When you first got bitten by the spiritual bug, and any kind of unfoldments that went along, and I'll kind of intersperse with questions as we go along.
Yeah. Well, I guess it really started when I was born. I began to question things at a very early age because of some of the experiences that I was having, and things just didn't seem to fit. And of course, I was just thinking earlier, what would I say about that? And I realized that, I've been my mother's son for probably 40 years. But it was thinking about this and, some of the early experiences that I remember 7 or 8 years old when we moved to the farm with my grandparents. And I was having already experiences of things that didn't fit into their Christianity.
Like what?
Well, I would have dreams that would come true. And one particular experience that's always stood out in my memory was that one morning my grandfather came to get me and said, the cows got out last night. We had some young heifers that they had them pinned up in a special area. And I said, oh, they're up in so-and-so hayfield. And he looked at me kind of strangely. He says, well, how do you know? Of course, he was kind of saw me as weird anyway, yeah. And, and in my dream, it was raining. And I remember in my dream, I had looked down and water was kind of splashing off of my legs. And I was walking through the grass and water was splashing. And there was an alfalfa field that I thought, well, they can't stay in that alfalfa field because it was blooming. And of course, cattle shouldn't eat blooming alfalfa because they'll bloat and it'd kill them. And so I drove them through the alfalfa field. And there was this culvert, which is the wet weather ditch. And I drove them through there, and I drove them up to this hayfield, which we had just harvested.
All in your dream, you're talking?
In my dream.
Right.
And there was nothing much up there for them to eat, but I drove them up there, and I said, now you stay up here. And so, I knew exactly where they were. And my grandfather, he's just having a fit. We're walking, and we have our rain gear on. I have my boots on, and I look down when we're walking up there in real life, and the water's splashing off of my boots. And that was the only thing different from the dream. I had my boots on, and it was drizzling rain, and he's just having a fit. He said, oh, they're dead up there in the alfalfa field, because he could see where they were walking, Right. He said, oh, they're all bloated up there. And I just, I knew where they were. And I think I was about 7 or 8 years old at that point. And, we walked up there, and you could see where they walked through the alfalfa field. And, they were up in that hayfield just kind of munching around on little tiny bits of grass and, just content up there. And they just had stayed up there. And he just kind of scratched his head, and he kind of looked at me. Yeah. Of course, at that time with the Christianity and everything, that was the devil's work. And so I learned very early in life to be still. Yeah. And so I sort of shut down at that point and became very introverted. And I kind of kept to myself. And I found out that I shouldn't talk about the things I knew, because I was very lucid and I knew what was on people's minds, and it created a very confused childhood for me. I was very introverted and very nervous. And of course my grandfather was hellfire brimstone all the time. It was the end of the world all the time, and I was kind of a nervous wreck most of the time.
It's funny that should be thought of as the devil's work, because the Bible and Christian literature is full of stories of people who had that kind of
thing. I didn't have access to all of that, but I never felt like it was the devil's work, and I just, I was always very much in touch with God, and it just, I just knew something that people weren't talking about, and I could see through people's fears, and I knew when people weren't telling the truth, but I knew not to question them on it. Yeah. But I chose at one point, somewhere in my life, around 10, I decided just to listen to what people said and not go with what I knew, because it just got me in trouble. So I just started listening to what people said. Okay. So I kind of shut that aspect off for many years.
So did you actually lose that sort of insight ability, or did you just kind of ignore it?
I just began to ignore it. Yeah, it kind of shut down. Yeah. And it took several years, and then a friend of mine one time said, "Now," he asked me, he says, "You know that?" He said, "Why aren't you using it?" And I just said, "No, I don't know. I just kind of was not safe with it." And so he kind of made an agreement that he would always tell me the truth. And so I just started opening up again, and that started that all up, and that was many years later.
Like in your teens or 20s?
Oh, it was, that was 40-something.
Oh, okay.
It took many years.
Yeah.
Of course, all this was still, I was still having my dreams, and I was still
Yeah.
knowing things all along, even earlier in my 20s, 25, after I left the farm and stuff, I would have my lucid dreams, and
Yeah.
they were still going on, but I just didn't do a lot with them, and I remained pretty much an introvert and kind of stayed to myself, and
Did you find
left
yourself...
the church when I was 18. I was still
Right.
involved in church work and stuff up to 18 years old, and planned to be a minister, but there again, things happened that just, it was like, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And it just kind of strange things, just like wrong papers came to me to fill out when I was starting to go to Bible college. And,
Right.
you know, it was just like the cosmos was saying, no, that's not it.
Did you find yourself during this time attracted to reading spiritual books
Oh, yeah.
and stuff like that?
Yeah, I hated reading in school, and when I got out of school, I started going to the library, and I had a wonderful librarian that started getting books from the state library for me. I got interested in psychic things. I got in because I was having these experiences, and I found out the church didn't have the corner on
Right.
on these things, and I
This
got,
is all in Missouri. I
in
presume,
Missouri,
right?
yeah. And I started I was taking home stacks of books and reading about things, and I said, wow, you know, there's a lot of sense here, and
Yeah.
I got really interested, and I started seeing these different connections with stuff, and that sort of, the whole thing started opening up after 18.
Okay. So you're reading Edgar Casey? and-
Edgar
Christian
Casey was one.
mystics.
I just, you know, I would sleep on books. I would just, well, come on, I want to do this.
Yeah.
I want to be able to know this. But Edgar Casey was a very interesting person, and he was one of the interesting ones that I read very early. Jess Stern, Youth, Yoga, and Reincarnation
I read
was
that
a
book.
really
Actually,
interesting.
I read that book when I was a new meditator. I was about 18 years old. I remember.
Yeah, that's one of the first ones I read.
Yeah.
And then
I remember he was dissolving clouds or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I joined the Rosicrucians when I was 18 years old, and that was a big step forward because they have a uncanny clarity about things, which really kept me from getting marred down in a lot of nonsense and psychic foo-foo.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot out there, a lot of foo-foo
Right.
nonsense, spiritual superstitious nonsense. So that kept me very clear, and so that was a very, very
Yeah.
fine path. So,
At some point, did you start to gravitate toward Eastern books like, you know, Yogananda?
yeah, I got interested, of course, with the bookstore we had. I had access to all kinds of information, and you know, it was all interesting, but none of it was it.
Were you doing practices or just reading?
Oh well, I never was marred by a teacher, and
They don't all mar you.
well, you know what I read and what I understood from everything. It was all partial. There wasn't nothing
Right.
complete, and everybody's, of course, has their opinion in there, and there's something this way, and I was enough that that wasn't enough. You know, it just wasn't enough. That wasn't complete. I would look at stuff and see a flaw and see
Yeah.
something was missing, and that wasn't good enough.
But you would get something out of it.
Something.
presumably.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I've taken from different philosophies, even Christianity. I've taken from everything that I could find something that would benefit us now.
Yeah.
Because it's important now. Well, we're living now. We're not living in the past, and we're not living in the future. We're living now, and it has to work now.
Right.
You know, I don't care if it's going to work 100 years from now. It has to work now.
One of my little guidelines for living is take what you need and leave the rest.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And there's something to be extracted from almost any
Sure.
experience.
Oh, yeah. Everything will work if one totally devotes himself and applies it to the present.
Yeah.
But most people are looking for escape, and that's not it. I
Right.
mean, you can't escape your life. You have to live your life. So.
Yeah, and speaking of marred by teachers, I mean, I've even seen examples where people follow a teacher whom I would consider to be extremely flawed, but based on their fervency and dedication, you know, they really get a lot of progress.
Oh, you can follow a toad and get enlightened.
Yeah. There's stories in the Vedas of people, you know, just worshiping a rock or a statue or
Yeah.
something and having
Yeah.
these tremendous breakthroughs.
Enlightenment doesn't come from the outside.
Right.
You know, and I think that's where people make the mistake. They think they're going to get something, and
Objective.
That's the real story behind everything.
Yeah.
You know.
All right, so here you were, going along, sleeping on books, and you know, reading everything under the sun, and approaching your 40s. So, what's the next significant milestone?
Well, after reading, after looking at these things, I got to this point where the same crap was going on in my life, the emotional stuff, you know, from childhood, and just the disappointments with people, you know, just the lying that was going on, and because of my acute intuitiveness with things. I could see through stuff so quickly, and so of course, you know, when you see through stuff, you get disappointed very quickly because you read something and you see what's left out.
Yeah.
You just see the partial truths of stuff. I mean, even the scriptures, there's partial truths, and
heavily edited.
Things are heavily edited,
all kinds of
misleading.
political situations.
Yeah,
of
I want you to
what ends
believe
up in-
this.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was really dissatisfied, and I had a whole huge bookstore of all kinds.
Oh, that's right. You worked in a bookstore, didn't you?
I had a book.
I saw that on your
bookstore.
website.
Yeah, I owned a
yeah.
bookstore.
You owned a bookstore.
Yeah. And so, you know, I was gradually sorting through the bookstore, throwing out the books that I just felt that this is not useful to anybody.
Right.
And, you know, I was gradually getting down to where there wasn't very many books that I could wholeheartedly recommend to people.
Yeah.
And it just got to where, you know, I don't feel good even having a bookstore because it's just misrepresenting it.
Did you meet any kindred souls during this whole period where, you know, other people who sort of saw life as you did and you could really relate to, or did everybody seem?
Not too many. You know, most people were looking for escape. And I met Leela. And there was a
your
few
friend and
people.
assistant and
Yeah,
partner.
yeah. Met a few people that just there's a handful of people in my life that have been there all along and very supportive and very encouraging, and but there was this point where this emotional turmoil just kept coming up, and I kept looking at this stuff, and I finally got to this place where I said, you know, this is just all crap. It's just none of it is working. None of it is. Everything has some hook, some place of escape. Something is about getting out, and that's not it. You know. And so I got to this breaking point, and I just, you know, I spent one night just practically screaming all night into my pillow, just alone, isolated, just totally, just crushed, and said, I want out. You know, I can't take this anymore. You know, if this is not working, these people are liars. You know, it maybe work for them, but then I look at their lives, and their lives is a shamble. I mean, they're good at hiding. I mean, these so-called masters, you look at their personal lives, and they're a wreck.
Yeah.
You know, they're alcoholics, they're sex addicts, they're all these different things, and that's not a life.
Advocating abstinence, meanwhile.
Right, yes. So, you know, it's like I just saw this hypocrisy with everything. And I just, you know, that's not it. And I broke, you know, I just was broke. And I was doing services, I was holding services, I was teaching meditation, I was doing all the work, and that morning after that, I spent the whole night just screaming, practically hoarse. And it was a Saturday night. Sunday morning, I did a service, and I talked to myself in the service, and it was just absolute love, and just talking to myself in this beloved talk, and just, you are loved. And I was so overwhelmed with divine love, and just felt that comfort and just absolute love and not alone. And I felt really good, and I felt so supported in that love, and just cosmic, you know, just cosmic kind of thing. And then maybe a week or 2 weeks later, Leela was gone at the time, and she came back in her RV, and she saw that I was just terribly distraught and just, you know, just upset, and I just was going through this turmoil, and she just said, well, what's wrong? And I just broke down again, and she just sat with me, and she just was sort of saying, you know, it's all right, and it's all right, and it's all right. And, You know, I'm listening to her, and my life is flying before, you know, they talk about a dying person's life passing before
Right.
their eyes. My life was flying before my eyes. And I hear her saying it's all right, and my brain is saying, my intellect, it's not all right, it's not all right. And there was a moment, everything stopped. There was a moment of silence, and it was all right. And she was looking at me, and she said, "What happened?"
So when you say everything stopped, you mean all this turmoil that you...
Everything,
It just all
it's just stopped.
subsided.
There was a moment, the brain stopped. It's tried to argue. It's like my intellect tried to argue, but it couldn't. It just, everything stopped. And she was looking at me, and I saw her face kind of surprised. And I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "You just changed." And she says, "You kind of lit up." And so I kind of looked in the mirror, and I was glowing. And I knew it was all right. Everything was all right. And my intellect could not engage. The brain could not bring anything up from the past. And I moved into this state of complete grace. It was just all right. And I could not say what had happened. But the intellect just could not engage anything. It just said, it just surrendered. It just, okay, you know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And at that point, nothing mattered anymore about the past. And I didn't know what it was. You know, of course, the intellect begins to try to figure out. People come in and say, "What happened to you?" Because my language pattern shifted. I got
Speaking
a
differently?
Yeah, I got a accent to my voice, and of course people thought I'm a walk-in. People thought I had a stroke because I couldn't talk normal. I
An
had
accent, I mean, is this your voice that you're now referring
This is
to?
pretty much my normal voice now, but when I get
This has an accent
excited,
compared to what it used to be, you mean?
maybe some, I don't know, but not anymore. I think I'm pretty normalized.
Oh, it's accented at first and then it sort of shifted.
Yeah, it's kind of, I've kind of got it normalized, but when I get excited, sometimes it gets back in there. And when I'm doing services, sometimes it'll get in there when I get speeded up quite a bit.
What kind of an accent?
It's, I don't know, kind of Scottish, or I don't know. It's just a kind of a mix of things, and it changes too. It depends on what level I get at.
Maybe there'll be some of that on your website videos.
Yeah, there's some on the videos. Yeah, there is some. If they listen to some of the older tapes, it's on there.
Okay.
And people used to, you know, they of course that would validate being a walk-in or something. You know, say, "Oh, you're, you know, something." But it was interesting for me because I had the bookstore, and people would wonder. I could see I'm very lucid, and they come in. I hear what they're thinking. They're saying, "Oh, the poor guy, he's had a stroke. He can't talk right anymore." And other people thought, "Well, he's a walk-in," you know. And one of my friends said, "Oh, he's died, and somebody else has taken over."
Really? So you'd actually pick up all this stuff just on the
I very much know what people were thinking. And somebody called Lena and says, "Oh, I heard that he died, and somebody else has taken over." And all this in our town, a very religious community, and some of our devils in there now.
I have a friend who did have a stroke, and his personality changed quite a bit afterwards. And I'm always teasing his wife that he's probably a walk-in.
Yeah. So we had all that going around, but it took you know, I don't know, a year or more or so for everything to, you know, and I realized after the fact that the pattern shifts in my voice sort of helped me know that everything was different, and not to go back into my foolishness, and just to be very mindful. That helped me to remain very present.
Was there a tendency to backslide, or was it pretty much
No, it wasn't a
clean
tendency to
clean break?
It was a clean break.
Yeah.
But it sort of helped me to say, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
You know,
We're not even in Missouri.
Not even in Missouri anymore. It was like, hey, you know, this is all different. And my feeling, knowing at that point, was that I could not rely on what I knew from the past as far as philosophy or beliefs or concepts. Everything I had to speak from direct experience.
Right.
That was one of the commandments. That was something that I knew at that point, that everything I did from that point had to be from direct experience. I couldn't talk philosophy or belief or religion or anything. I had to speak to, my work was to be direct experience. It was to be directly what I experienced firsthand.
Yeah, no,
And
I
so
really relate
I
to
didn't
that.
have any experience. You know,
Yeah.
it was like everything I knew was what I had learned from books and and so everything was a direct experience. And so I didn't have any. So I had to start experiencing.
So you couldn't talk much.
I couldn't talk much, and
Right.
people were shocked because
they're
I could
used to you
always
talking.
just, I could tell them, they'd
Yeah.
ask me something, well, this book says, this book,
Right.
I could quote this and that. And so I wasn't talking very much either. I said, what's wrong with you? You always have an answer for me. I said,
Yeah.
well, I'm under this mandate. I'm not supposed to talk unless it's my experience.
Yeah.
And so, of course, immediately I started having these really intense experiences with life, and I could really very seeing things happening and understanding, and my understanding increased so much.
Did you, it's funny, I went through, I wouldn't say similar, but kind of, you remind me of a change that I underwent in the sense that I taught Transcendental Meditation for 25 years, but I was always parroting. I was just sort of, here's what I was taught to say, now I'm saying it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about states of consciousness that I haven't experienced myself.
Yeah.
I can have an intuitive feel for them, but it's not my experience.
Yeah.
And I reached a certain point at which I felt I can't do that anymore, and I still don't feel qualified to teach, but I'm good at asking questions because I don't have to know anything to ask
Right.
questions. But there's this desire to sort of be authentic and not to pose as something one is not. And I imagine that's kind of what you were...
Yeah, that was the whole thing, was to authenticate the space. And my feeling, knowing at the point, was that life and the cosmos was saying, we're here now, and this is the work that we're doing, and this has to be authentic.
Yeah.
And it's not about anything else. It's about being this.
Right.
And it's a physical experience. It's to be a body. And it's to demonstrate that this is possible. And it's an awakening of the flesh in the world. And it's not a spiritual thing. It's a very physical thing. It's bringing the whole thing online. And it's very powerful. And my knowing at the point was it was going to change everything in myself and everything around me. And it was my job to prepare people for that change. And it was hard for people because it scared some people away, and other people just couldn't drive them away with a stick. Those that saw, felt, and connected, and others just that's too much. And
So after you had this shift, were you still attracted to reading books, or did you, and if so, did you see them with a whole new perspective, and no longer have that pinch that you felt that there was always something missing, or did you just give up reading books because you were just completely focused on your own experience at that point?
I haven't found very many books that are very interesting to me.
Okay.
Because I'll read a book and it's like, it's not complete.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you kind of alluded to some people finding you more interesting or attractive or something after this shift, and others getting a little spooked and distancing themselves. This implies, I guess, that you had a little satsang or something, a little study group that you were leading?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then when you underwent this shift, there was a kind of a separation of wheat from chaff that took place. Actually, well, any comments on that? Because I have another question. But
what was funny, as this awakening was a kind of a drawn-out process, and when I first started doing some of this, when I first started getting acquainted with my true self, my cosmic self, I recognized Ishvara, and it seemed like it was something was exterior to myself, and so I would be speaking from that space, and of course people saw that as channeling. And we had, you know, at our little store on Sunday morning, I'd have 50, 60 people coming. And they were all excited about it, and you just had lots of people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I said, this is me, you know, that people couldn't accept that. They wanted some outside entity. They couldn't accept a person being here in the flesh.
Huh.
And so a lot of them split. We lost a lot of people at that point.
That's interesting. That's funny that it's, and when you refer to Ishvara, is that a name that you use to kind of refer to the cosmic self or to the higher self?
Well, no. As I said, I was my mother's son till I was, 40 years old or something. And then I became the cosmic son.
Right.
And the cosmic son's name is Ishvara. And so, you know, I realized it's taken a long time to understand why I couldn't be known early on, because the whole body had to be prepared. You know, I had to have a lot of physical experience, and the body had to mature enough to be able to handle the influx of this energy that's happening even now. I mean, the body is still in this state of evolving I mean, a lot of stuff is changing still. And so, you know, that's why I say I was my mother's son up to 40 or so years old.
In the sense that everyone is their mother's son.
And then after the awakening, these things began to change. And so, it was this just transformation. So at that time, as this began to change, I became aware of my true self. And of course, I had to play with that for a while, because I wasn't willing to accept, oh, that's something else. You know, I was like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. That's too weird. But over a period of time, it's like finally the feeling, knowing, and my inner awareness was coming. Quit fooling around with this. You know, just own it. It's who you are, and we you know, you're either going to keep being this and keep this held at bay, and you're going to keep having this. You know, it's going to keep. You know, you're going to hold it off. You can, and but to move forward, you're going to have to own this. Yeah.
Now, by definition, it almost seems, you know, that a spiritual awakening, in the sense that we are using the term, is a shifting of identity. You know, and so many people who have such an awakening say, well, for so many years I thought of myself as this, you know, flesh-bound. I identify with my body. Now I realize I am not that. I am something much vaster. And so is that basically what you're referring to? I mean, you choose to use the word Ishvara. In principle, could everyone call it Ishvara if they wanted to? But that's just a word that you find to be descriptive or representative of it?
I think that the thing that I am teaching, the thing that I'm bringing to people is that we're dual, and we would not be alive without this duality. And each cell is dual, and we have a cosmic aspect to our cell. We have the there's an imbalance in the frequency to create life. It's an imbalance. There's the slower and a higher. The slower is like a negative. It's not a negative as bad. It's a negative and positive. Positive is a slightly higher speed, a higher frequency, and the negative is a lower frequency. And these two combine to create existence. And so everything's vibration. And so we're always in this kind of imbalance. And what happens as one awakens, the balance shifts. And so one, instead of being all flesh, one becomes more cosmic, and that's a slow process.
Yeah, kind of like a seesaw.
A seesaw, yeah. And so most people are kind of teeter-tottering, and you have moments of elusiveness. You have moments of inspiration.
Most people, I would say, so the seesaw's like this.
Yeah.
You know, I'm Joe Truck Driver, and
and people cling. And see, what happens is that the flesh gets all the representatives. I mean, the flesh has the conditional reality, it's consensus reality. The flesh gets from day one, is the programming, is all the perks, is all the help, is all this, and the cosmic self is put in the background.
Yeah.
And as a child, that's your imagination, that doesn't exist. And so everything is happening according to the world, according to the material man, and the cosmic person, the cosmic being is put to the background. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of held out there. And so naturally, a lot of people make this really separation between the two. And so that's always out there someplace.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very dense world we live in,
Yeah.
you know, and
It's no wonder. I mean,
yeah,
you
the
know.
conditioning is very strong, and stuff is coming at us, and I think most people don't even realize there's a cosmic self. If
Yeah.
you start talking about it, they say, what are you talking about, you know?
Yeah.
But obviously, these days at least, it seems to be getting more and more.
Well, people refer to as a soul or spirit
Yeah,
or
throughout history.
master within. There's
Sure.
any number of things that's referred to, but
Yeah.
I'm always trying to give it some fresh looks because there's so many hooks to all these different words.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, the cosmic self is a kind of unknown word maybe that maybe people can say, well, what do you mean by that? If you get a person to start asking a question,
Yeah.
then maybe there's an openness there. But so my cosmic self is called Ishvara. That's the name of that. And I just realized that name, Ishvara, is all that man can know of God. And to me, that's all that I can know of God. And God to me is just a word.
Right.
That you know, that may offend some people, but I realize that God has many faces and many interpretations, and so I'm not settling on any one thing.
Sure.
And source, what is source? Source is everything. If it's any one place, it has to be everywhere. And so we can argue today's world's end on that. And so people can believe what they want to believe, but I recommend that people find something, hook themselves to something that's totally unlimited.
Right.
Because if you believe in something that's limited, then you're as limited as that. And so if you can find something that takes the ceiling off, then you know you can go as far as you can imagine, as far as you can go.
Yeah. You're old enough to remember the Incredible String Band, perhaps, but two lines from their songs come to mind. One is, whatever you think, it's more than that.
Yeah.
And another one is, light that is one, though the lamps be many.
Yeah.
And when you say, my higher self is Ishvara, I mean, would you acknowledge that I or anyone could say the same thing if
Sure.
they chose to use that term to refer to it? And would you also say that, you know, you and I and Leela and everyone have this, it's this, on that level, you know, on this level we're waves, on that level we're this all one ocean,
Yeah.
and it's the same cosmic self.
Every-
It's not
yeah.
like there's a bunch of
Right,
separate
yeah.
cosmic self for each individual.
No, the cosmos, the cosmic, the universe, the absolute, has divided itself into unique expressions. So each one of us is a unique expression of that, an individual, but not separate.
Right. No two waves on the ocean are the same.
Yeah.
But
But yet it all
it's
comes
all
from
the same
source.
ocean. Right.
And source splits itself into all this diverse manifestation.
Yeah, or appears to.
Yeah. And so it's all connected. And so it all comes from source, and it's just, and each unique expression has certain unique purposes to it. And
Role to play.
role to play
Gifts to give.
and gifts to give. And so people that get attached to a personality or a certain expression get trapped. And so there's a certain unlimited way of being with that where we don't have this attachment.
Right.
And there's a freedom that follows from a non-attachment. So.
Yeah. I liked what you said about a certain imbalance is necessary for,
Oh,
for
yeah.
creation to even arise.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's like as if to say, you know, back to the ocean metaphor, there has to be some kind of wind or something to stir up some waves. Otherwise, it's just all
Sure.
flatness. And you know, so there has to be some perturbation or some disturbance in the force, so to speak, for creation to arise. And that's, as you say, that's not bad. It's not wrong.
Right.
It's just the way it works.
The very nature of vibration is there has to be something, you know, something has to be
Yeah.
a little off. Something, the vibration is,
In Sanskrit, there's this term lesha vidya, which means faint remains of ignorance, and that's not meant to be a bad thing. It just means that in order for life to be a living reality, to distinguish between the wall and the door, between your fork and your mouth, whatever,
Right, yeah.
there has to be an appreciation of differences, and some people don't like that term because they feel like it demeans the glory of creation.
Well, let's just celebrate diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is that the cosmos has created itself in all these different aspects to have this experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it all was the same, blah.
Right.
What's the point?
Yeah.
And the people that try to annihilate the duality don't know what they're talking about.
You mean sort of the Neo-Advaita people who it's all an illusion.
It's all an illusion, and what's the point?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had many arguments with friends that are very stuck on the non-duality, and I said, fine, go ahead, go blah,
Yeah.
What are you going to do then?
I mean, if you think of it from God's perspective, so to speak, there's this explosion of creativity that's happening constantly throughout this whole universe, and whether you look in a microscope or in a telescope or whatever, this is amazing sort of brilliant, infinitely intelligent play going on, and to me that is it's so beautiful and so profound, and it seems like a disservice to try to just dismiss it as an illusion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the very act of creating is a duality. I mean, the whole thing is based on a slight imbalance, and the cells are based on a slight imbalance, and we always strive towards some kind of harmony, but that's our act.
Yeah.
And so we're always doing that, and we fantasize about, we're going to bring the world to some kind of harmony. But it's not going to happen. But the whole thing is we learn how to compromise, we learn how to work with each other and embrace the diversity of life.
Yeah.
And celebrate it.
And I would say that you could sort of think of the wholeness or the cosmic value as being like a solvent or a lubricant or something. Yeah. The differences are still going to be there, but everything sort of works so much more harmoniously if there's a sufficient, infusion of that or balance with that. It's like you can have your Republicans and your Democrats and all your differences, but if there's enough wholeness, it kind of embraces all those diversities, so they don't clash with each other. So,
yeah, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. Everything fits together if you allow.
Yeah. I don't mean to sound like some kind of Sanskrit scholar, but because I'm not. But as I understand it, the term Brahman in Sanskrit is thought of as there's a saying that Brahman is the eater of everything, and I think what that is meant to say is that it sort of engulfs and contains all the differences. It doesn't eliminate the differences, but it's kind of more than the sum of the parts, and is able to sort of contain them.
Yeah.
And in so doing, you often find people, and I'm sure you would say this yourself, who have kind of awoken to that level of life, who are real comfortable with paradox and ambiguity. They can sort of be presented with very diverse viewpoints and say, yeah, I can see where that fits into the bigger picture, and sure, and this thing over here, which is completely at odds with that thing, I can also see how that thing fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that a bit, or I don't?
Well, it's the art of living is about allowing that ability to see how things fit. And if one can't achieve that level, you're kind of doomed, because you're always going to run into someone or something that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And the diversity of life, just seeing these differences and seeing how each unique aspect belongs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go through life thinking this doesn't belong, then you're going to be in trouble.
And getting back to your grandfather, I mean, I think there's an innate human desire to rise to an absolute perspective,
Yeah.
because that is sort of in it, or hardwired to need that. But failing to do so, people have a tendency to take a relative perspective and make it absolute.
Yeah.
And then when they do that, obviously it clashes with everything else,
Yeah.
you know, because it's not absolute. And so they see themselves as sort of at odds with everything,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
this kid who sees the cows in his dreams and what,
Yeah.
you know, devil. Yeah. It's interesting that when you first had this awakening, you know, your little group got spooked because they were, or some of them anyway, because they were comfortable with the thought that maybe you were channeling some entity, some individual being, but they were, some of them weren't comfortable with the idea that, you know, you were just speaking from cosmic awareness or wholeness.
Yeah, people have had trouble with the authority that I've demonstrated, because I do have this knowledge that I just know, and it's just there, and so I speak with authority, and so I'm often criticized for that authority.
Christ had the same problem. He said, you know, people say, "Who's this guy to say all this?"
Right.
Who does he
You know,
think he
I've
is?
had it a lot, and you know, it's just, well, you know, I mean, and even people that it resonates with, they still have a problem with it. You know, even though they know in their heart it's true, they still, well, you can't say that. How do you know? And so, but what do you do when you have access to something and you know it, and it proves to be true, but yet people still have a problem because you said it? You know, it seems that some people feel like they need to put me in my place because I don't have some lineage, because I don't have some special teacher, because I don't have some college degree, because I just, you know, well, you're not trained, you're not a psychologist, how do you know? You can't do this, you can't say this. And
Well, you don't strike me as dogmatic. I mean, you're not
No.
sort of saying, this is the truth, and,
No.
you know, if you don't agree with this, you're going to hell, or some
yeah,
such thing.
yeah.
I mean,
I just put stuff out there and people can take it or leave it.
yeah, which is sounds like a pretty easygoing way to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not demanding.
I'm
you're not
often
threatening
criticized because
people
I'm not stern enough.
Yeah.
You know?
And you're not threatening people with dire consequences if they don't believe what you say or anything. And give me an example of something you might say with authority that people might take exception to.
Right now I can't think of anything.
All right. But like you'll be giving a talk, for instance,
Yeah.
and you'll be speaking as if you really know this stuff, which you do, and people are thinking like, you know, how does he know this stuff? Or is he, you know, just quoting books but appropriating the knowledge to himself? Is that the kind of...
Well, let's see. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I don't mean to put you on the
Yeah.
spot.
No,
but-
I can't really think of
Yeah.
anything.
But I think I understand the principle.
It hasn't happened for quite a while,
Yeah.
because most of the people I have around me now have been with me for quite a while now,
Uh-huh.
so they're used to me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you know, I think it was Christ said a prophet is not without honor except in his own home.
Yeah.
And, you know, and there's that saying, familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah.
If a person seems like an average Joe in most respects, you know, and yet speaks with some kind of profundity,
Yeah.
people think, well, wait a minute, how could this guy, he's like me,
Yeah.
you know, how could he be speaking this way?
And a lot of that is, you know, I am very normal, and I live a very normal life.
Mhm.
And people sort of, I know one woman one time criticized me. She says, well, I had bib overalls on,
Mhm.
and I'd been out in the garden, and she says, well, you can't be enlightened.
That's great. Well, you know, that's actually why I came up with this title, Buddha the Gas
Yeah,
Pump.
yeah.
I mean, the implication being that, you know, you might run into somebody at the gas station pumping
Yeah,
gas who's in the
right.
state of awareness that Buddha was in. They don't have to look special or talk
Yeah.
special or
I
anything.
mean, that's something to get people over. I mean, it's not a look.
Right.
It's the way one lives their life.
And it's not a way of speaking or
Not
a way of
speaking.
dressing or, you know, Doesn't matter how long your hair is or whether you have
And,
hair.
and I used to wear robes, and some of our old videotapes that are on television still, I wear robes. And people, well, you're special because you wear robes. No, I wore robes because that was the only thing I was comfortable in. Because the energy of my body at the time was still adjusting. And normal clothes, it would I just feel
Too confined
rigid
or
and
something.
confined. And Leela noticed it when she said, you're just not comfortable in clothes.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine made some robes, and oh, so
Yeah, it
good,
feels
so
good.
comfortable. And so I started wearing robes, and I'd wear them everywhere, and people, oh, look at this guy in a robe, who's he? And I just got over it, you know. I could
Yeah.
feel, of course, I could hear him, you know. And but I got over it, and I could just go out wearing my robes anywhere, and it didn't bother me. I just kind of just okay.
I did that in India for a while, wearing dhotis and,
Uh-huh,
and whatnot. But of course, in India,
That's
But then I was a
If I was
Westerner,
in India, it'd
whatever.
be okay. But then I got to where I could finally wear more normal clothes now, and I actually wear regular jeans or shirts and stuff now too.
yeah,
So I've got to where the clothing doesn't matter. My body's adjusted again. It's
Yeah.
constantly going through changes. So I'm wearing just regular dress pants and dress shirts now
sure.
too,
You
and
go
it's
to
fine.
put on a tuxedo and go someplace.
Yeah,
whatever.
It doesn't bother me like it did before, but
Yeah.
so it's still changing. But it was funny. People would criticize me for that. Well, you're just trying to be special because you're wearing a robe. But I said, no, I wear a robe because that's the only thing I'm really comfortable
Yeah,
with.
and other people criticize you because you didn't look special enough wearing bib overalls. You know?
Yeah, right.
It's like,
So it
can't-
was always
can't
something
win.
outside that people would find to
Yeah.
criticize you about. And so I said, well, just, you know, sometimes like, well, just do extreme to give them something really to holler
Right.
about.
I think this illustrates a point, which is that, you know, people do tend to objectify the idea of enlightenment and to assume that it is characterized by certain trappings, you know, a certain way of speaking, dressing, whatever, eating,
Shaving your head.
shaving your
you know.
head, not
Well,
shaving.
I shave my head because I
growing
don't
your
have any hair up there.
Yeah, right. So
I said when I was, I think I was 17 or 18 years old, my grandfather was bald when on my mother's side, or on my father's side. He was bald when he was 27 years old, and I remember a picture of him up in the mountains. He had snow on his head. And I always said, and then I said, if I ever get bald, I'm going to shave my head. And so I started losing my hair when I was 17 or 18 years old. You can see in my school pictures, my hairline go like
Yeah.
that. And so I shaved my head when I was probably 25.
it's for convenience.
Because it was just getting really thin and hard to do anything with. And so finally when I shaved it off, and people said, well, why do you shave your head for? You know, well, because I don't have any hair, and it's just a job to try to do anything with it. And it looks ridiculous trying to comb it back and trying to get it up
Yeah.
there. So I just gave up with it. So
Let's talk a little bit about this transformation of the body, you know, with this kind of cosmic awareness or cosmic energy and what it puts the body through. You know, I've read various things where some people really go through hell because you know, there's so much voltage and the body's just really freaking out, trying to adapt to it. And some people, it's a more gentle process and it's more slow. I mean, the person I interviewed previously to this interview, his name's Sarojini. She was a normal housewife, didn't have any concept of spiritual things, and all of a sudden one day she felt this energy in her head and her kundalini started awakening, and she didn't know what kundalini was, and she started searching on the internet, and she thought she had a disease, and she was just going through all this incredibly intense stuff, and over the course of 10 months she went through this transformation, and after 10 months she had this sort of click awakening to the you know, higher self, which she hasn't lost since, but it was for her in a very compacted period of time. So, you know, how has it been for you, and how is it continuing to be? And sort of, let's talk about, you know, the extent to which the physiology might ultimately be refined, perhaps.
well, I was doing pretty good for quite a while after the awakening, and then I got some rheumatoid arthritis stuff going on, and the professionals said that they would try to keep me comfortable as I progressed towards a wheelchair. It was that bad, and I just wouldn't accept that, and I just kept knowing this was some kind of weird transformation going on, and I kept feeling like the body was in some kind of rebuilding process. And so...
Were they trying to give you drugs?
Oh yeah, they had me on different drugs and things, and nothing was really working.
Right.
And I was doing a lot of herbal things too.
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor said, well, it's not going to hurt you, but I don't think it'll help you either. But he got really interested in, you know, my practice, because I was doing my meditations and things, and he could see that I learned how to control it with my mind. And so I could make it back off when it would start up, and so that was when we were in Oregon still. And I noticed when we came to Santa Fe, I came to Santa Fe to do a talk, and I felt a lot better here. And I told Leela, you know, maybe Santa Fe is the place to be, you know. So shortly after that, we moved here because I just felt better. But it was already starting to clear up before we left, and that was Oregon. But that was one thing. And then a couple years ago, I started losing a lot of weight, and something else was going on, and they found out that I was gluten intolerant. And so I went through this, and so I've been going through a lot of, in the last couple of years, a lot of physical transformation, which was like another boot up for the system.
Another boot up?
Yeah, another...
Like a rebooting?
Yeah, rebooting system, yeah. And so that was quite intense, and last winter was very difficult for me. And it's just a shifting, changing of the energy again. And so things have stabilized pretty good now, but my diet has really changed. I've lost a lot of weight.
Well, you look like a good weight.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. But I'm allergic and diabetic and different things. The system has just demanded.
You're diabetic?
Yeah, it's just all at once. It's kind of, you know, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so okay, you know, that's good. You know, I'm just totally intolerant to sugar. A little tiny taste of sugar gives me a headache.
Yeah.
The body is very, you know, a body system is so in tune. And the moment I taste something that's not right, the body reacts to it. So I've got this really fine-tuned system now that lets me know right away what it doesn't want.
Yeah.
And so I listen. You know,
Sure.
I've learned to listen very closely, and so it's well balanced.
Good.
And but I've seen the reason of that is that my energy is so highly refined now that it doesn't want any kind of blockage or anything that's polluted or anything like that in there. So it's just you know, and I don't quite understand all of it yet. It's just it's still in this process.
Yeah.
So
some people might argue that, well, you know, you'd be going through help things regardless of any sort of spiritual awakening, because everybody does. But I understand.
See, I've always been very, very super healthy, and then all at once, you know, I mean, I was 190 pounds, doing very well, working every day on our place, doing gardening, eating very well, everything up to a point that all at once I couldn't eat.
Yeah.
I started losing weight, and I went from 195 down to 130.
Wow.
I couldn't eat.
Period.
And you know, and then I had an allergic reaction to penicillin, and then in the meantime I was gluten intolerant.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, I wasn't a vegetarian.
Are you
now? No, no.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no. And so all of these things just kind of happened overnight almost. I mean, it wasn't a gradual thing. It was just like all at once this turned.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something like you say my age. It just, and then, you know, it was just, you know, we could say, well, it was building up, but it was like usually when those things build up, it's kind of a gradual, you know, breaking down. This kind of like
abrupt.
One night you wake, or one morning you wake up and hey, you know, all these things at once. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm anticipating what skeptics might say. Some might say that this is just part of being a human being.
Oh, well, yeah.
Growing older, but I have seen many instances where, you know, with the dawning of some cosmic awareness or something, the body starts to freak out because it needs to fall into line with that higher energy. It can't really. It's like what was Christ said something about putting new wine into old wineskins or something. The body needs to sort of undergo a transformation in order to come into line with.
Yeah, I saw it as a purification.
Yeah.
I just saw it as something that the body needed to do, and it just used, it's opportunistic.
Yeah.
You know, it just used that as, I just saw it as, I feel great now, and, you know, I'm 65 years old, and it's just, you know, I just, and I work just as hard as I ever did now. And I mean, I get out here and I dig holes. I dug that waterfall out there, dug a big, huge hole for almost solid rock.
Wow.
And, you know, I just work just as hard as I ever have, actually harder in some ways.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, it certainly hasn't weakened me.
No,
And,
I shouldn't
you know,
think it would.
So it's, you know, it's...
But all these things, that, you know, the body
Yeah.
and the mind or the soul or whatever, they're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And you know, like if you pull one leg of a table, all the other legs are going to come along. And you know, some people, they do it the other way around. They might do all kinds of physical purification in the hopes of elevating their consciousness. And sometimes that works to some extent, you know. But in other cases, it's like zoom. You know, the awareness dawns, and the body, you know, starts to have to come in line.
Yeah. Well, I started looking at, okay, I have these things going on with the body now. What am I missing? Is there something I need to look at with the body to help it?
Yeah.
And so I started going back into some of my older teachings to look to see, you know, like, and also it's like the thyroid was off. And the thyroid with some of the spiritual stuff is important.
Sure.
And, you know, and something that the doctor happened to miss when he was doing the test was my thyroid, the iodine was really low.
Yeah.
And he didn't know it, you know, and said, oh, we didn't run that test. And they ran that test and the iodine was really off. And started taking that, and I started feeling really better right away. So there was just some imbalances there.
Well, this is a useful point, too, because, I mean, some people might think, well, oh, I feel like crap, but it must be some kind of spiritual transformation taking place, so I'll just keep feeling like crap.
No.
You know, a lot of times you need to go to the doctor and...
I say go to the doctor first,
Yeah.
get a health checkup, find out if there's anything physical first. You can't blame it on spiritual stuff. I never did blame it on spiritual stuff because I went to the doctor when I lost weight. They couldn't find out what was going on with me. I had to help them find out what it was. But you know, they didn't know about some of these things. They just didn't like gluten intolerance at the time.
Right.
This was several years back, and they didn't just know about this. And later on, they started finding out. We had to do our own research.
Yeah.
And so after that, then now they're getting a lot. There's a lot of information about these things, but you know, it's just one test he missed, and so, and then you go, oh well, we didn't do that test. We better do that, and so I did that test. Oh wow, you know, you're down here. You better do this, and so after I do that, because last winter I was freezing to death. I could not get warm.
Right.
I just could not get warm. And of course, you know, the mind thinks, oh, it's something spiritual, it's terrible is happening to me, you know. But I tell people, my students, I say, look, you know, make sure first that there's not something physical going on.
Right.
That's the easiest thing to do, because spiritual stuff, that's hard. You know, trying to figure out spiritually, you know, you can meditate, and, you know, the intellect gets in there and says, oh, well, you must be this, it must be that, because you got all this consensus reality, spiritual mumbo-jumbo out there that says, oh, well, you know, this, that, and the other thing, and you don't know. It's just...
Now, your website is called enlifement.org, ENLIFEMENT.org. And it's a very beautiful website, by the way, real nice graphics and everything. Why did you choose that term, enlifement? What do you mean by it? And I suppose it represents what you teach.
Well, enlifement, all of my teaching is about life, living life now.
Right.
And so we all the group got together and we talked about what could we, because our other one's elia.org, and so we're talking about, well, what would really get us, you know, what's it saying about what we want to present, and we're about life. My teaching is about living life,
As opposed to some airy-fairy future.
yeah, it's now,
Right.
and so living life now, enlifement, in life now.
Right.
And so we found a word that wasn't being used,
Mm-hmm.
and we did all our research, and it's really hard, getting a word that's
Getting a
not
domain
in
name,
use, so
right.
a domain name and everything.
Yeah.
Did all the work to get that, and so, yeah, enlifement. And so that kind of fits the teaching, and it's enlifement, and so it's...
And so if a student comes to you, what do you actually teach them? What do they go home with to practice or whatever?
Well, I don't have a structured teaching, and so my work is tailored to the person
Individually.
individually. Yeah, and I work with them individually, and I point them to their self.
Mm-hmm. In what way? How do you do that?
Well, it's like, what do you need? What do you expect? And what are you doing for yourself?
Let's
What have
say
you
they
done for
they
yourself?
come and they say, well, I really want to, know what you know. I want to have that cosmic self dawn in my awareness. I want to be enlightened. That's what of course I need all kinds of relative things, but this is my highest priority. How do I get that? What do you say to them?
Well, I would first ask them what they've done
So far.
so far.
Yeah.
What have you done for yourself so far?
Mhm.
And what are you trying to get away from?
Do you usually find that people are trying to get away from something?
A lot of time they are.
You mean like
yeah.
just boring job, bad relationship,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff?
A lot of times.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times people come to spiritual journey
Because they're suffering.
because they're suffering.
Right.
Yeah. And trying to escape something.
Of course, there's no harm in trying to come out of suffering.
Oh
It's
no,
natural.
no, it's natural.
Yeah.
But that's what drives people. Because usually when a person's not suffering, they're not too much interested in spiritual things.
Good point. It's said in some circles that the angels have a real hard time getting enlightened because they don't even want to close their eyes. They're enjoying so much.
Yeah, right, yeah. So that's usually the nature of it. It's,
Yeah.
So you find out what a person's suffering, and if it's something psychological, you maybe lead them to a psychologist, or if they have drug addictions, you lead them to some place that can help them with addictions.
Yeah.
And, I don't spend my time with addictions because there's too many good things out there to help a person with addictions.
Yeah, it's not your specialty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you point them to their self.
Hmm. And do many of your students practice some kind of meditation or something on a daily basis?
Some of them do, and some of them don't.
Uh-huh.
It just I don't teach a particular meditation. It's very unique to a person,
Right.
and so I help a person if they want to meditate. I work with them finding something that works for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And have a lot of your students been with you for a long time?
Yeah.
And what kind of progress do they seem to be making?
Well, they're just being life.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're sticking around, they must be getting something out of it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And do you?
See,
mean-
I don't create expectations in people.
Right.
So it's a way of life. It's
Mhm.
a way of being.
But there must be another dimension to it, in a sense. I mean, sure, I can understand, living life more fully and living in the moment and not sort of, yearning for the past or, hoping for the future, just sort of being fully in the present. Is that one way of, do you help your students kind of begin to shift into that orientation, for instance?
It's a lot of the work that I'm doing is talking, the new consciousness and the new human
Right.
that we're becoming,
Uh-huh.
which is like this cosmic self.
But people are going to think, wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I want to do it. How
Yeah.
can I become the new human? How can
Well,
I?
it's of course accepting the old human first,
Right.
getting to be okay with that,
Mhm.
and the foundation, of course, for one's life is being okay with what is.
That's a good point.
And unless you're okay with what is, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're escaping.
Right.
And so the first step, of course, is being okay with what is.
Mhm.
And that's usually the hard one for people
Mm.
because they have a lot of judgment,
Yeah.
and that seems to be the hardest step, the longest step for people.
Hmm.
But once you're okay with what is, then you're ready to take on something.
So let's say that among your students, a certain percentage have reached the stage at which they're okay with what is. Then what? I mean, then what is the progress for them, or how do you facilitate their further advancement?
Well, the next steps are pretty individual. It's like realizing that life is what you make it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, who do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see yourself
Mm.
in this world? And you know, I don't create expectations in people, so it's pretty much up to the individual. How do you want to live your life? And you know, I don't teach people to become enlightened,
Mm-hmm.
because to me that's nothing. That's just another game that people play.
Right.
And so it's about embracing your true self, finding your true self,
Mm-hmm.
and letting the body go through this transformation.
Mm.
And
Wouldn't you say that that's what enlightenment is, though? I mean, the word has so much baggage that it's,
well,
you
yeah,
know, we're
so I don't talk about
hesitant to
enlightenment.
use it, but
Yeah, I don't talk about it.
whatever that word ideally is supposed to represent,
Yeah.
perhaps it was meant to represent just exactly what you're
Mhm.
saying, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
finding your true self and,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and having your whole relative life, including your body, come into alignment with that.
See, that's the thing where living life in a way of being in harmony and balance
Yeah,
day by day,
Mhm.
being present with what is,
right.
to me, is it.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens each moment is it,
Right. Yeah.
you know.
So I was listening to someone the other day, and someone had asked him, you know, well, how do I know what the will of God is? I want to do the will of God. And his answer is Adyashanti, actually, I was listening to, and his answer was, well, look at what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's the will of God. You know, be in tune with that.
Yeah, because most people have this kind of idea that, well, this isn't it, it's supposed to be something else.
Yeah.
And so trying to keep people in this state of awareness of contentment
Mm-hmm.
with what's in front of us, you know, being this, because there's so much discontent arises from thinking this isn't it.
Right.
And there's something better, there's something more. And that more, that better doesn't come from somewhere else. It comes from being present here.
Yeah.
And each moment, one has this access to feeling, knowing. And if you're really present and allowing, you have this intuitive kind of knowing that's kind of happening, and you kind of get inspired.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to do this now. And
Exactly.
I'm going to do that now.
Which is good that you said that, because a person might, you know, hearing the first part of what you said, they might think, oh, well, I just get totally content with what is, and then I just sit there and stagnate, you know, and
No,
I
we
don't
don't
try to
sit.
improve
No, we
things.
don't
I mean, you know, when you moved into this house, you probably saw a backyard that was pretty sparse, and sure, you were content and resting in the moment, but you thought, whoa, you know, I'm going to plant flowers here, I'm going to dig a fountain there, and, you know, make all these improvements to make this a more beautiful space. So motivation and incentive are not incompatible with contentment.
Yeah. No, it's always action.
Yeah.
I'm not a sitter. I don't teach sitting.
Right.
It's always keep moving, keep being, and keep doing, and
Yeah.
creating.
It's one of
Being a
those paradoxes,
creator,
and
yeah,
I think it
it is.
bears reiterating, because, you know, some people look at somebody like Eckhart Tolle or something,
Mhm.
and they'll think, well, he just seems to sit there like a blob and talk, you know, and I don't want to be, you know, if being in the now means just sort of being passive and not having motivation and inspiration and initiative,
Yeah.
then I don't want it,
Yeah.
you know. And I think what you're saying is that it doesn't mean that.
No.
That, you know, the two, even though they might seem paradoxical, they fit together very nicely.
Yeah. Yeah. One is to be active and creative.
Mhm.
I mean, we are movers. We're not sitters. We're not silence. Silence is not silent.
Mhm.
You know, silence is the act of having the intellect not going crazy.
Yeah.
And we're creative, and the cosmos is creative. You know,
Yeah.
the universe is always
Huge
this
creativity.
dance.
Yeah.
And to think that we're supposed to be still and silent and is really an oxymoron. Nothing is. Our body is never still.
Right.
The cells are always very busy, and if, you know, if our body sits still for one moment, we
We're dead.
die.
Yeah.
And so it's the whole universe is this dance and this movement, and that's what we are. And so when people think about life, they need to think about the dance, the movement, and the action, and the creativity that we're capable of. And every moment is a new possibility for something. And so to inspire people to be creative and to use their ability to create and to do that and to be participating. It doesn't matter what you participate in, just so that it's something that comes from you.
Yeah.
Something that you can get yourself into, that you feel enthusiastic about, that you feel real about.
Yeah.
Not just to do something.
Right.
That's false.
Something which you feel called to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say that, you know, someone who's doing that, who's enthusiastically pursuing their calling, at the same time, you know, they can be perfectly silent within.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that silence is like the foundation.
Yeah.
And then on that foundation, you know, you can
Yeah.
rise high in whatever way you want
Yeah.
to do. There's this whole kind of point of misappropriating levels, you know, assuming that the silent level has to be applied to the active level.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not the way it works.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to, you know, I mean, do you sort of have any kind of long distance way of teaching people, or do they have to be in Albuquerque?
Oh no, we Skype with people. We have people in Germany.
Oh, that's right. You have a group in Germany.
Yeah.
And theoretically, you could have a group in Australia or whatever.
yeah.
Although I'm sure you
Wherever
don't relish the
people-
idea of flying to Australia. But
No, yeah. Yeah, it's and we're working on doing the video. We're setting up to do that and have that broadcast.
kind
So
of a
make it
live
available,
streaming
kind of
thing?
a
or-
live streaming thing.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah,
And
we're
people will be
working
able
on
to
that. People will be able to
call in
tune into
questions or
that.
something?
Yeah,
Cool.
we're working on doing that. So. Yeah.
So enlifement.org is where people should go to find out more.
Yeah.
Is that right? And I'll have a link in your picture and a
Oh,
little
thank
description
you.
and all that,
Yeah.
so people can just
Yeah.
go there. Okay. Is there anything you feel like, you know, I haven't thought to ask that we really ought to have covered that's important to you, you know, either in your own experience or things you like to tell people or anything else that we really haven't touched upon that we ought to have done?
I can't think of anything other than, you know, it's my love for people that keeps me doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. That
Really.
sounds good.
I mean, it really is. I have great compassion and understanding. You know, I've been through it. I've just been about everywhere a person could be, and so it's given me great compassion for where people are. So,
Yeah.
you know, I have this understanding, and you know, it's just.
One thing that's interesting that I forgot to mention is that, you know, in some cases people seem to be, they're kind of in a mess, and they're struggling and striving and trying to get out of their mess and doing spiritual practices and meditating and whatnot, hoping to someday, you know, it's almost like they're exerting effort, hoping to come out of this dilemma. And in other cases, people, and this I'd say was more in your case, it's sort of like some big cosmic hook came and grabbed him around the neck and said, here we go, hang on, you know, this is what you're going to do. And they found themselves just sort of inexorably propelled along a trajectory toward awakening, and kicking and screaming in some cases, you know. And it's funny the way it works that way. It's like some people aren't the least bit interested. You were. I mean, at the age of 7, you were having these visions and you know, prognostications. But some people, it's like farthest thing from their mind, and all of a sudden something just grabs them, and they find themselves holding on for dear life and going through this awakening process.
That's funny how it works. I mean, I was always very spiritual in certain ways, and you know, called towards the ministry, and just very disappointed when that fell through, and just like, well, what was that all about?
Right.
And then to come back to this and in this way, and so, well, I guess
This is
something
what
was
it
still
was.
going on, you know, and it's just different,
Yeah.
different than I imagined. And
Some people who say that we kind of prearrange before we're even born that we're going to serve a certain role, and that, you know, we eventually hopefully find that role and start to fulfill it. Well, you're fulfilling yours, it seems.
I think so.
Yeah.
I haven't got fired yet.
Yeah. Well, good. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me over. I've enjoyed this talk.
Thanks for doing this, and it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, good meeting you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So thanks to all who have been listening or watching. And I'm not sure in which order this is going to be aired, but while I'm here in New Mexico, I'm also going to be interviewing Leslie Temple Thurston, if everything comes together for that. And either this one or that one will be aired first according to the production complexities. But those are the next couple of interviews. And after that, back to Skype. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.